U.S. President Barack Obama names a new director for the FBI. What will he bring to a bureau now under scrutiny over its practices? You're watching Inside Story Americas from Washington. Hello, I'm Kimberly Halkett. U.S. President Barack Obama has named James Comey as the new director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. But his nomination is controversial, given his history at the Justice Department under President George W. Bush. And it comes at a time when questions are being asked about the FBI and the Obama administration's respect for civil liberties, something the current president made a point of addressing.
Jim understands that in time of crisis, we aren't judged solely by how many plots we disrupt or how many criminals we bring to justice. We're also judged by our commitment to the Constitution that we've sworn to defend and to the values and civil liberties that we've pledged to protect. And as we've seen in recent days, this work of striking a balance between our security, but also making sure we are maintaining fidelity to those values that we cherish is a constant mission. That's who we are. And it is in large part because of my confidence, not only in his experience and his skill, but his integrity, that I'm confident that Jim will be a leader who understands how to keep America safe and stay true to our founding ideals, no matter what the future may bring.
And Patty Culhane has more on this from the White House.
The position of FBI director is an important one because if James Comey is confirmed, he'll keep the job for 10 years. He, in essence, becomes the nation's top cop, deciding who gets investigated and how they are investigated. He is slightly controversial. For one, he is linked to those torture memos. He was one of the lawyers involved during George W. Bush's presidency that signed off on the use of 13 different interrogation techniques, including sleep deprivation and waterboarding. The lawyers argued that it didn't constitute torture because it didn't create long-term physical pain or long-term mental health issues. Now, Comey is likely to be asked about that, but Democrats do like him because he was the one who put an end to the warrantless wiretapping of Americans under the Bush administration. He is expected to be confirmed despite the torture controversy.
Well, joining me now to discuss James Comey's nomination as FBI director are from Denver, Colorado, David Sirota, columnist with Salon.com, and here in our Washington, D.C. studio, president of the New Democratic Network think tank, Simon Rosenberg. And next to him, Shahid Buttar, executive director of the Bill of Rights Defense Committee. Mr. Rosenberg, I want to start with you. You know, the FBI has really changed in the last 10 years. It's transformed itself from sort of a domestic law enforcement agency to one that's more focused on fighting terror. So what is the thinking in this nomination from the Obama administration's perspective? Why put James Comey forward?
Well, clearly they decided to pull somebody out of this sort of new security realm who's been fighting this new war, this new both offensive and defensive war that we've been in over the last 10 years, and who's well known in the community and well respected in the community. I mean, I as a Democrat have some reservations about some of the things that he was involved in, but I think I think they're making a good case for him, and I think his nomination is going to sail through the Senate.
When you say community, do you mean the law enforcement community or the political community, sort of the wider Washington?
No, I think that that we face new threats in the United States. I mean, I think that what part of what this debate is that we're having now is what is the right posture? How do we actually manage our affairs? How do we defend the country with not only new threats around terror, but a whole new set of threats around the cyber world that are very serious and real? And how are we making sure that we're keeping the country safe, but doing so in a way that honors our values? And I think that there are legitimate questions been raised in recent weeks about whether we've struck the right balance. And I think this conversation we're having is a healthy and good one, and perhaps long overdue domestically in the U.S.
And we're going to continue to have that conversation in these next few moments. But first, I want to look at Mr. Comey's background. He does have previous experience in government and in the private sector. He was the second highest ranking official in the U.S. Justice Department during George W. Bush's presidency. He left that post in 2005 and went to Lockheed Martin, the Defense Department's largest defense contractor, to be their general counsel. Now, he left the company in 2010, went on to serve as a board member at HSBC, and a lecturer on national security law at Columbia University's Law School. I want to ask you, Mr. Buttar, I mean, in light of some of this experience, you know, Robert Mueller was heading up the FBI for more than 10 years. He was actually asked to stay on even a little bit longer. How is this experience that Mr. Comey has likely to influence or affect the post in some way?
Comey's nomination represents a choice for continuity over change by the Obama administration, doubling down on its pattern of extending the Bush administration's abuses on the Constitution. And James Comey, unfortunately, I would dissent from one of the introductory notes that Patty had shared, and that Comey didn't stop the NSA's warrantless wiretapping scheme. He allowed it. He's tried to stop and did stop a worse version of it, which remains secret. No one even knows how bad was the thing that he stopped. But the NSA eventually rolled a warrantless wiretapping program that remains active to this day. The recent controversy has emerged from leaks into just tips of that iceberg.
He certainly raised some red flags, and we're going to get into this quite a bit in depth. In fact, perhaps maybe we should look at some of those controversies right now that really surround some of this appointment. In fact, Comey's appointment comes as the FBI is being criticized for several recent incidents. President Obama has ordered a review of the agency's investigations of government leaks to journalists, including the secret gathering of Associated Press phone records. There are questions about whether the FBI failed to heed warnings from Russian authorities about a suspect in April's bombings at the Boston Marathon. And while an FBI agent was questioning Ibrahim Todashev in Florida about these bombings, he shot and killed the 27-year-old. So there are contradictory accounts about basic facts in that incident, including whether Todashev was armed. The agency has also been criticized for its use of surveillance drones in the United States, including earlier this year during a hostage standoff in Alabama. I want to continue with you, Mr. Buttar. I mean, you touched on one of the controversies. We're probably going to be discussing a lot of these here, but the point being is that what is Mr. Comey going to bring perhaps to this post? Is he going to direct or address some of these head on?
One hopes. I mean, I think that confirming him at the moment is not yet a foregone conclusion. And so speaking of his confirmation as inevitable, I think is premature. So I hope that, quite frankly, he doesn't have a chance to bring whatever he has to bear to this nomination. I would like to see someone else nominated for this post with a greater respect for the Constitution. And his service in the private sector in particular, I think, should raise a lot of red flags, because Lockheed Martin, of course, has essentially defrauded the Defense Department to the tune of $2 trillion for weapon systems, namely the Joint Strike Fighter, that don't even fly. And this was what Comey did to cash in after his government service, and I don't think that's the kind of person we want at the top of the FBI.
David Sirota, I want you to weigh in on all of this, bring into the conversations. I mean, there's a lot of talk about civil liberties in the United States right now in light of the revelations about the NSA surveillance programs that have been going on for many, many months, many years, in fact. Many would argue that the Obama administration is trying to deflect some of that criticism with with this nomination. What's your thought?
I think that's exactly right. I think that the administration thinks that it can put forward James Comey, get Republicans to support that nomination because James Comey comes out of the Bush administration, and then can essentially suppress dissent from progressives because of Comey's high profile, but I think in many ways misleading reputation as somebody who supposedly stood up for civil liberties. So I think as a political move, as a political tactic, it's pretty smart. I do think, though, that to hold this nomination up as proof that the Obama administration is taking civil liberties seriously is actually, it's an oxymoron. It's actually, I would agree that it's the opposite, that James Comey did raise objections, and it was good that he raised objections. It was sad that he was one of the few who raised objections to one form of the warrantless wiretapping system, but it's actually, in a certain sense, it's almost worse that somebody who had an inkling that warrantless wiretapping was unacceptable and went to John Ashcroft and said that, then also subsequently agreed to basically a very, very similar version of it. That somebody who knew what should be objected to actually ultimately didn't resign, didn't show courage, and went forward in essentially normalizing that program.
But keep in mind the climate. I've been covering Washington for a long time. I mean, 2004 was a very different time in Washington. Anyone who spoke out in any policy raising these type of red flags was almost ostracized or isolated. I mean, isn't that sort of standing up for what he believes? I mean, that was a pretty bold move back in 2004.
Well, look, I worked on Capitol Hill back then, and the problem is always that if you don't have people in positions of power who are willing to stand up on principle, then you're not going to get any change. That, in other words,
no
a lack
one
of
was
courage
standing up for principle
begets a
back
lack
then.
of
I mean,
courage. I disagree with. I disagree with that. I fundamentally disagree with that. I worked on Capitol Hill with members of Congress who were standing up on principle and found no.
But you were labeled as unpatriotic at that time if you raised those.
I understand that, and I think that's unacceptable. But my point is this: that somebody should not be credited with courage for raising an objection and then going along anyway and not resigning, in essentially normalizing the principles with which they were objecting to. That is not courage. And so to hold that person up as some sort of courageous nominee on behalf of civil liberties, I mean, you can say he was certainly better than a lot of other people in the Bush administration, but to hold it up as a person of courage and principle, that goes way too far. And I think that justifies, frankly, the idea that when things are tough, people shouldn't actually stand on principle.
Mr. Rosenberg, do you think that's what the Obama administration is trying to do with that nomination?
Well, I think that this whole debate reflects the struggle that is going on inside the administration right now. And I think that this president, who taught constitutional law, prior to coming to the Senate, is struggling with the reality that the tools that he has at his disposal, he feels have kept America safe. And I think that's indisputable. I mean, I think this notion
I disagree.
that I know, that's okay. But I mean,
there was just a bombing in Boston 2 months
yeah,
ago.
there were, but there have been. I talked to a lot of security officials. Anyone who's working in the government right now who has the responsibility for dealing with the cyber theft, the cyber crimes, the Russian, mafia, all the stuff that we're dealing with, the Iranian intrusions into the United States that have been coming, that have happened in the last few months. Everyone will tell you that these are incredibly powerful tools that have kept America safe, and to deny it, I just think, is incredibly naive. I mean, we're in a very uncertain world right now. The U.S. is, for hook or by crook, forward-leaning in many parts of the world, and so I think the president is struggling with how do we make sure we retain as much of these tools that we have to keep the country safe. He said it himself in the introductory thing, and balance civil liberties. I don't think the balance is in the right. I personally don't think the balance is in the right place right now. I think my two colleagues would agree with me. And we need to have this debate in public, not in private rooms, about making sure that there are limits to the government power that have been accrued over time by our administration, but also to do a better job at fighting other governments that are spending their time coming into the U.S. and stealing our stuff. And I think this is stuff we got to put on the table and have a big conversation about.
Is that the conversation that's going to take place?
Can I make one quick point?
Sure. Mr. Buttar is going to jump in here, and then I'll get to you, Mr. Sirota.
And I do fully agree with David on most of these issues, and with Simon on a few of these too. The president did speak great words with respect to needing to strike the right balance between civil liberties and counterterrorism objectives, and unfortunately they're mere words, and the reality doesn't line up with the rhetoric at all by a long shot. And if we look at the FBI's record over the last 10 years, it includes not only an assault on freedom of the press in the Associated Press surveillance that was recently revealed, infiltrating mosques around the country and faith institutions, peace activist groups, environmental groups, even preceding 9/11. I was part of a lawsuit against the FBI in 2008 to gain a then secret policy, which Congress still has yet to see, just like the NSA records in which the FBI is complicit. The FBI is renowned for assaulting civil liberties and civil rights, even going back to the 1950s until the 1970s, and even in the 1980s, right? There's never had a clean record. And the last 10 years, there's certainly no aberration. And even on this question that you put forward as unassailable, that it's effective, I would beg to differ there, because these tools have never been demonstrated as effective. They've been claimed to be effective behind a wall of secrecy that is self-justifying. It rewards cronyism. There's no way of proving the counterfactual. Most of the FBI's prosecutions of supposedly counter-terror plots within the U.S. are ones in which they've bribed.
So now that this conversation is taking place, and David Sirota, maybe you want to jump in with the points that you want to make, but given that there will be Senate confirmation hearings on this nomination, is some of this going to be discussed now in a way it may have been or should have been many, many years ago?
Oh, absolutely. But that has nothing to do with James Comey. That has to do with the disclosures about the NSA surveillance and how big and the size of its scope. But that doesn't. I don't think it has to do with Comey. And I would say this: I think we should be questioning all of the assumptions now. All of the assumptions that are baked into this debate. One of the assumptions is that this kind of surveillance and these kinds of tactics make us safer. Look, Unless Simon knows more than members of the Senate Intelligence Committee, Mark Udall, my senator here from Colorado, and Senator Wyden on the Intelligence Committee, those two have said that there is absolutely no evidence, that they have seen no evidence, they have been provided no evidence, that this kind of surveillance has made us any safer or stopped any of those terrorist attacks. In fact, when the Obama administration came out right after the first NSA disclosure and said that this stopped the bombing plot in the subway bombing plot, within 24 hours, news organizations through public documents debunked this. So the point in raising that is only to say that, yes, I think that these confirmation hearings will allow these questions to be asked, and the point will be whether Comey is confirmed or not. I think whether there's progress in this debate is predicated not only on whether he's confirmed, but on whether the fundamental assumptions that have gone unquestioned for too long are actually challenged and debated and discussed honestly with evidence and facts out in the open, rather than with assumptions that simply say all of this makes us safer.
Now, why do you think, David Sirota, that right now in the press, especially with the articles being written about this nomination, there seems to be this portrayal that he is somehow a defender of civil liberties? I mean, let's take a look at the issue of waterboarding or enhanced interrogation techniques. This is something that was also, something that he raised issues and concerns about, but ultimately approved. Given this record, then, why do you think he's getting the pass?
Well, look, I think it tracks a bigger trend, that when politics becomes more extreme, people who are moderate look out of step or look courageous. Let me give you an example. If you looked at the policies of a guy named Barack Obama in office, and you went back 10, 20, 30 years ago, you'd say he was a mainstream Republican, maybe even a conservative Republican. But because the political debate in general has moved so far to the right, Barack Obama is still portrayed as some sort of liberal. It's the same thing with James Comey, and it goes to your earlier point about how difficult it was to speak out on civil liberties or really do anything on civil liberties in 2004. James Comey, to his credit, raised a few objections that so few people were raising at the time that in retrospect it looks like he was a great hero even though he wasn't. So I think that what we're seeing is the fact that James Comey's portrayal is a commentary on how far to the, if you want to call it the right, or to the anti-civil liberties part of the debate has actually moved.
And just to reinforce this, none other than Ari Fleischer, the Bush administration's press spokesperson, described, in his words, to the Obama administration's credit, the Obama administration as the fourth term of the Bush administration in the wake of the NSA leaks defending them. So Comey is just another part of that pattern that we've seen since 9/11 in terms of the crackdown not on terror but on the Constitution and the rights of we the American people. And James Comey, I dare say, is unfortunately a reflection of all the worst things of the Bush administration with a softer face. Well,
even the ACLU, American Civil Liberties Union, is raising some concerns about this nomination on the points about the enhanced interrogation techniques, as well as some of the approvals of the surveillance programs. Mm-hmm. I mean, is Mr. Rosenberg, I'm wondering, is this something that could possibly backfire on the administration, that this maybe wasn't thought out carefully enough, or is this the best the administration could do?
I don't think it will backfire on them, but I do want to just pick up some of the things that's been said. Is that if you think about one of the things I just want to come back to is that the idea that at this point we don't know that this technology has helped keep us safe is a failure in itself by the administration to communicate about what it's been doing. Right, the drone program. Every one of those drone strikes where we're taking out bad guys is using this technology all the time to help locate and track the people that they're going after. All of our troops around the world, when they're fighting bad guys, are using portions of this technology. We're involved in a extraordinary ongoing quasi-proxy cyber war with the Chinese and the Russians and the Iranians that involve hundreds of billions of dollars worth of intellectual property of the United States. These are things that are going on, and the people that I talk to in the administration who are getting up every day trying to keep the country safe, they laugh at this idea that this technology hasn't been useful. It's used every day.
But isn't that beside the point? It's how it could be abused. I think that is the concern.
But I'm agreeing. Let me just finish. So the point is, the administration's done a terrible job at explaining to the American people about what they're actually doing with these tools and how they're actually working to keep people safe, because it is without question to anyone who's actually working on this, these are powerful tools that have done a good job. Now, to your point, yes, we should be very worried about how this accumulation of power by our government, by other governments, right? The Chinese have been by far and away the worst actors in the world in abusing the power that they've accrued through this powerful technology, right, is how this is going to be used in the future. And that's why we need to have a serious debate.
And I think Robert
about
Mueller
domestic,
even acknowledged
domestic
that
and
this
international
past week
norms.
at the Senate Judiciary hearings that you know there needs to be this conversation. Seems a little late to be having this from many Americans' perspective. I want to ask you, Mr. Buttar, you know, we've had these revelations coming out of more of the documents, these intelligence documents that were leaked by Edward Snowden. This now about the FISA court, that these documents reveal that the court has deemed it okay to collect data without a warrant and to store it for up to 5 years. You know, this is a tool that obviously is being utilized by the FBI. Is this something that could likely change, or is this something that you gentlemen have been saying is that, you know, this is status quo, nothing's going to change under this nomination if confirmed?
If confirmed. And confirmation battles in the Senate are key moments of opportunities for accountability of the agencies that the confirmations are for. For instance, the CIA director's confirmation hearings when John Brennan was up before the Senate Intelligence Committee earlier this year, that was the high watermark of transparency into the drone program. The American public learned more about what's being done in our names in the context of that confirmation than we had ever heard since the beginning of the drone program. Similarly, James Comey's nomination has to be a moment of long overdue transparency into the FBI. And I think the more that we discover about what the Bureau has been up to, the less and less is the possibility of his confirmation, because the only reason he would be confirmed is if Congress continues to act in the dark. And it's been legislating in the dark and enacting first the Patriot Act and then the FISA Amendments Act of 2008, extending each of those statutes repeatedly. And still
it's been legislating in the dark to a certain extent. There are a handful of members on these intelligence committees that did seem to have a better understanding than rank and file. Well, that's true, but not enough. And I'd go to David's point. Senator Ron Wyden, a Democrat from Oregon, is a perfect case in point. He's asked very tough questions of the NSA in public long before the recent revelations, and the responses he's gotten have ranged from, we wish you could tell you, but we can't figure it out, in response to how many Americans have been impacted by warrantless surveillance. And another answer that the NSA gave is, well, we can't give you a number because if we did, it would violate the privacy of the people who we've been monitoring, which is preposterous. And so members of Congress, even the ones most read into these programs, have still even sought answers to questions and gotten
You forgot one answer. You forgot to add one answer.
Tell me, David.
One other answer that they got was they lied. James Clapper went up onto Capitol Hill.
The director of national intelligence.
He essentially perjured himself. And essentially, he did perjure himself. He said that there isn't a collection of data, any collection of any data on Americans. And
now we have the smoking guns proving him wrong.
Exactly. Yeah. So there's a lot of dishonesty swirling around here. And I echo the hope that this confirmation battle becomes another opportunity, one of those rare opportunities where we actually learn more, the public learns more, and members of Congress learn more.
Well, David Sirota, I just want to follow up with you there. I mean, it seems like there's an issue of accountability. That's a whole other show, one I can't really bring up at this point. But the bottom line, is this a candidate, James Comey, is he an individual at the end of the day who is focused on protecting the rule of law? Is that something that you think he will do if he's confirmed as FBI director?
Well, I don't have confidence in that, and I think that what we've seen from him is a person who's willing to try to shape actions and reinterpret laws in ways that are less extreme than some of his Bush administration colleagues, but still in the scope of history extreme. I want to say one thing, though, one positive thing about him. I do think that the Obama administration feeling the need to put up a nominee who at least is known for something decent on civil liberties is actually a good sign. It just is a sign that they at least feel that they need to somewhat, even in a fake sense, even in only a rhetorical symbolic sense, at least address some of the criticisms. That's at least something.
Is that something, Mr. Buttar?
I think it's something, but it's not enough. I mean, lip service is great, but
Agreed.
I say that, I think we're on the same page here. Rhetoric is wonderful, and lip service is fine and dandy, but we really need substantive changes in policy and the law. And Congress can't provide the changes in the law without transparency into what's happening. This confirmation hearing is an opportunity for Congress to finally gain some sunlight and understand what's been happening under, quite frankly, the noses of oversight committees that have not been doing their jobs.
All right. Well, it'll just be a matter of weeks before we have the opportunity to see how all of this plays out. Gentlemen, thank you. We're out of time. That is all from the team in Washington, D.C. for now. But I want to remind you, Don't forget to follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. That is where you can find more information about our program. And as always, we want to hear from you here at Al Jazeera. Share your ideas with us on Twitter. You can find us. Our handle is AJ Inside Story AM. Thanks for watching Inside Story Americas.